Welcome back to the channel. This is Trinity Storm and you are watching first part of What If Naruto Became a Dual Half-Breed. If you enjoy this video, please like, share and subscribe to the channel. Now wasting no more time, let's start the story.
From Rayne's perspective. I'd finally done it. I exterminated the cretins who assisted my vampire siblings in turning the world into hell. But I'd misplaced everything along the way. For reasons I cannot explain, the Brimstone Society abandoned me and attempted to have me killed. They failed to kill me, but they did kill my first lover, Severin. I went into a bloodthirsty rage and hacked the perpetrators to shreds. They were eventually destroyed by the other vampire lords who made my father, Kagan, look like a regular vampire. Even so, the Brimstone fought back and took out the majority of them, making my job easier. I beheaded 2 of them as they exited the building. The final one was too fast for me, and he escaped before I could kill him. I eventually found my twin sister, Kana, while searching for him. She'd fallen in love with a human man and decided to protect him and their 2 children. She, unlike my other sisters, desired only to live in a peaceful world. I vowed to kill the final vampire lord and return the world to normalcy so she could live happily ever after. It took 10 years to track him down. My sister came by not more than a week ago, I discovered. She had sent me a letter saying that if she didn't send another letter, I should keep an eye on her human family in case she didn't return. Instead, I easily dispatched his guards as I continued on my way to him. When I finally got to him, I discovered that he was the first vampire to ever exist and that anything with vampiric blood was his offspring. When I found out he had ripped her into pieces and kept her head as a trophy, I flew into a rage. I had no pity for him and returned the favor 10 times over. I have been watching over my sister's family for 300 years, since the end of the vampires' reign over humanity. It appeared that humanity had forgotten the path of the past and had begun anew. They no longer created weapons of mass destruction, but instead learned to use chakra. After some research, I discovered that it was an attempt to replicate how demons could use their yuki, but instead of being able to use it at will, they had to use hand seals. I was deeply saddened when Kana's last member died by sealing a demon into a newborn child. It took me 5 years to return to the village because I was preoccupied with other matters. Even if the last of my sister's family was no longer alive, the least I could do was make sure the child he had given the burden of being Kyuubi's cage was okay. But something puzzled me, and that is why I left. What makes Kyuubi want to attack the village? It didn't make sense for him to do so. He was lord of the land of fire and shielded its inhabitants from greater dangers. I knew him, even if we were only acquaintances. Despite being one of the smallest shinobi villages, I knew he admired the village hidden in the leaves for its unwavering loyalty to one another. So why? Could he have been duped, or did someone gain leverage over him and force him to attack? If that was the case, I would gladly assist in locating and slaughtering the perpetrators. Since the shroud's end 280 years ago, it had been the middle of the night, and I couldn't go out into the light. I wasn't concerned that they'd find me. Nobody in this village could stop me even if they tried. If they couldn't defeat Kyuubi, there was no way they could stop me. I made my way silently to the Hokage's tower to find out where the vessel was. I was about halfway there when I noticed a crowd gathered around something. Beliar's eyes suddenly activated for the first time in centuries, for the first team in centuries. It hadn't done so since I stopped him from regaining full power. I could see what they were surrounded by thanks to the zoomed vision it provided. As rage consumed my form, my blood began to boil. They were beating a small 5-year-old boy with sunshine blonde hair that had turned sickeningly brown from the blood and dirt in it. During the beating, his eyes opened, revealing the pain in his vibrant, electric blue eyes. Minato-esque eyes. While I was thinking about what that could mean, a man in the crowd pulled out a kunai and stabbed the young boy in the heart. I exploded toward the scene, unable to contain my rage any longer, my bloodlust rolling over me in waves that would make Kyuubi green with envy. They all froze in terror as my angels sprang into action. I grabbed the man who had inserted the kunai into the child's heart and cut him in half, resulting in 2 perfectly even pieces. The rest of the mob was terrified, as some screamed and tried to flee, only to find me blocking their path. No, these people would not get away without being punished. I couldn't let it happen. I took out my Carpatheral dragons and began mowing down the mob with blood bullets. When I ran out of blood, I hung them up, intending to refill them later. My angels sprang back into position as I drove one of them through the chest of a pink-haired woman and used the other to cut off her arms. I decided to let her live, but I wasn't sure why. I quickly slaughtered what was left of the mob, leaving only a few survivors. I used the ones that remained to quench my thirst and replenish my dragons. 4 of the village's elite shinobi wearing masks jumped down and decided to kill me for murdering these villagers. Murder. That made me laugh. Isn't that what they did to that child? The one dressed as a dog gave me an answer that reawakened my blood rage. That isn't a child. That is the demon who nearly destroyed our ville. When I drove my blade into his neck and sliced his head in half, his response came to an end. As I turned to face the other 3, the 2 in front of me were vaporized by a pitch-black flame from their own comrade. He was oddly dressed in a weasel mask, which made the situation quite ironic. He removed his to demonstrate that he was only a teen of about 13 years old. Since I killed the first member of their clan, known as Madara, I recognized the red eyes from anywhere. The boy belonged to the Uchiha clan, but his eyes were different. Instead of the usual 3 tomos spinning around a pupil, his eyes resembled a 3-bladed shuriken. He went over to the boy and took his pulse. He is still alive. They had to have just missed the heart. He won't live long, though, because the hospital medics refused to treat him without a direct order from the Sandame. I don't know many medical jutsu, so all I can do is relieve the pain. Hearing this, I was taken aback, and I dashed over to him to assess the boy's condition. I sighed, knowing there was only one way to save him at this point. I turned to face the Uchiha, shaking my head. When I say the word, remove the kunai. The teen looked surprised for a moment, then nodded and gripped the kunai, waiting for my command. I bit my wrist, which surprised the teen, and placed it in the mouth of the barely conscious child. Drink. From the perspective of Naruto, why? Why must things be this way? I never made a mistake. Did I? I mean, a few harmless pranks couldn't possibly make them dislike me this much. Could it be? Why are they not stopping? Have they not already hurt me? Why can't they leave me alone? All I want is to be free of this agony. In my head, I hear a voice telling me that everything will be fine in a few moments. I want to believe it, but then something sharp nicks my heart in my chest. As my vision began to fade, all I could do was scream in agony. Is this the end, or what? It appears to be pleasant, but the pain persists. Why does my pain never seem to fade, but rather intensifies? I heard the villagers scream in fear, but I have no idea why. I hear sounds like miniature explosions, followed by the sound of metal ripping through flesh and bone. I wish I didn't know what that sounds like, but I do from personal experience. It just wasn't right. Why is it only me? There had to be more. So, what made them decide to harm me? I overhear a man discussing arresting someone for the murder of these people. So that's what was going on. Someone attempted to assist me but arrived too late. As I was thinking this, I heard a woman's voice laugh at that and say, "Wasn't it murder for killing me?" The man said something about me being a demon, then abruptly stopped when I heard the sickening sound I had previously heard. Then I heard 2 screams and felt intense heat, but I had no idea what was causing it. Someone put their hand on my neck and spoke loudly. "He's still alive," I say. I hear footsteps before I hear the young male's voice say that all he could do was relieve the pain. On the inside, I smiled, thinking that at the very least, I wouldn't die in such agony. I hear the woman's voice once more. When I say the word, "Take away the kunai." Something gripped the kunai in my chest as something was placed in my mouth with a coppery liquid coming out of it. I hear the woman's voice again. "Drink." I'm not sure why, but I did it in the hope that it would relieve the pain I was experiencing. So I began sucking on whatever she was putting in my mouth. It tasted strange but soothing at the same time. My body felt like it was on fire, but it didn't burn like it usually does. It was actually quite pleasant. I continue to drink as I hear the woman's voice again. "Now." The kunai bring was yanked from my chest. I screamed in agony as it was ripped out, but I noticed something growing in its place. It was too much for me to bear, and all I could see was black. Kyuubi smirked from within Naruto's mind as he noticed the change in the boy's body and the cage beginning to fall apart. Kyuubi decided to look around a little and saw Rayne's face through the boy's eyes. He discovered that he had a similar blood pattern to Rayne's while in the boy's body. After discovering this, he went through Naruto's very first memories and discovered one when he was still an infant and didn't have him sealed in him. As he walked to the battleground, he saw the Yondaime pick him up and summon Gamabunta. He said one more thing before starting the Shiki Fujin. "I apologize for this, my son. May you have a happy life?" After witnessing this memory, Kyuubi realized she was Rayne's sister's last descendant and awaited Rayne's arrival. He began to flare his Yuki as the seal weakened in an attempt to break free when he sensed her blood entering Naruto's body. Normally, he wouldn't care about a single human being's life, but in this case, if he didn't at least try to help the boy, he might not be alive for long, rendering the point of escaping completely futile. He could tell Naruto wouldn't survive the wound even if vampire blood flowed through him. To counteract this, he began to transform from a human to a demon. He knew it wouldn't be enough to take over the vampiric blood being injected into him. He'd have to wait until the boy's body completely changed before escaping his prison. Rayne and the young Uchiha both watched as Naruto's body began to transform into a dhampir's. His fangs hardened and grew as his hair grew longer, and his body began to fill out more, giving him an athletic appearance. Rayne's eyes widened as she noticed his wound wasn't healing quickly enough and realized he wouldn't survive. Just as she was about to say that, Crimson Yuki exploded from Naruto's body and covered him before it began to physically change him. Naruto's teeth lengthened and hardened even more, and his hands gradually elongated into claws as his muscles grew larger. The Yuki that was flowing around him slowly dyed his hair, leaving him with red streaks. It had stopped as abruptly as it had begun. Then, in an instant, a greater amount of Crimson Yuki erupted from his body, separating from Naruto before taking the form of a man. Kyuubi no Kitsune stood there in his human form once it was finished. He had reddish-orange hair similar to Ichigo's from Bleach, but longer and shaggier. He was dressed in blood-red shinobi pants with an orange belt tied around his waist and a white shirt, similar to Sasuke's in Shippuden, revealing his muscular but lean build. His crimson eyes locked on the two before he turned to Naruto and watched as the wound healed in seconds. Kyuubi smirked as both Rayne and the young Uchiha looked stunned. He might not be as powerful as Rayne, but he had a much higher regeneration rate. Kyuubi shook his head and turned to face Rayne. "You should be content. At the very least, your sister's blood remains within him. As soon as he finished speaking, the Hokage and the majority of Konoha's shinobi arrived, having detected Kyuubi's Yuki pulse. The women with blood-red hair who were picking up Naruto's unconscious form terrified Sarutobi. Rayne turned toward the old man and glared at him as she lifted him up, making him fear for his life. "I thought you said he died." Rayne yelled in rage. She would not have left in the first place if she had known the last heir of her human family was still alive. Sarutobi gulped in fear and spoke shakily, hoping she wouldn't kill him for it. "I did it for his safety. Please bear with me." If people had known who his mother's child was, there would have been twice as many assassination attempts on his life. Rayne tightened her grip on the man as he unleashed an ungodly amount of killing intent, making everyone in Konoha want to commit suicide to escape the terror, and a few of the untrained civilians nearby did just that. Even Kyuubi was terrified by the amount of energy she was expending. You can see how well that worked out. She took a few deep breaths to calm herself down before returning her gaze to the terrified Hokage. "I'll take him, and you shouldn't be surprised if you don't see him again. And if you do, you'll be sorry." When Rayne spoke, Kyuubi had already grabbed Rayne's shoulder and was about to teleport them away. "And the Uchiha?" He quickly turned to face him and nodded, his other hand resting on Itachi's shoulder. A flash of flames covered the four of them before they vanished, leaving everyone stunned and fearful for their lives. The foursome appeared in a flash of fire at an ancient-looking mansion that appeared to be over 200 years old, judging by the dust, cobwebs, and rust covering the outside. Itachi's eyes widen as he inspects it. Even with all the dust and cobwebs, the structure of the Uchiha mansion where the head family lived made the Hyuga complex look like a home for dwarves and outdated and out of date. Before Kyuubi ushered him inside, he had to wonder who built such a structure. Itachi looked perplexed at the fox demon. Kyuubi sighed, shaking his head at him. "It's not a good idea to hang out around these wards late at night. There are creatures here that can kill and eat the best shinobi in a matter of minutes. Particularly the damned turned. If you come across one, flee like the devil is after you." It doesn't help that they look similar to him. Itachi looked at Kyuubi, perplexed, as he had no idea what a turned was. "Exactly what is a turned?" Kyuubi sighed slightly as he walked to the window, pulled up the curtains, and pointed outside. Itachi blinked a few times before approaching it and looking outside. He couldn't see anything after a few moments, but with the help of his Sharingan, he noticed movement in the tree lines. When he gets a better look, his eyes widen and he jumps back. "Oh my god! What on earth is that?" Kyuubi looked at him before shaking his head and smiling slightly. "That'd be a turned. Big, stupid, and incredibly difficult to defeat. Most vampires and demons are unaware of their weakness." Rayne sighed as she noticed Itachi's terrified expression through the window as she stepped off the last step of the stairs. She shook her head and fixed her gaze on Kyuubi. "Didn't you have to show him one?" Kyuubi nodded, his face contorted in a shite-eating grin. Rayne rolled her eyes before phasing out of existence and slamming Kyuubi in the back of the head. Itachi blinked a few times as he saw this before regaining his composure and returning his gaze outside, slightly terrified of the gruesome-looking creature. "What exactly is preventing that thing from entering here?" Rayne shook her head before motioning for Itachi to follow her up the stairs. Itachi rushed up behind her, not knowing if his Amaterasu could burn what he saw through the window. After a few moments, they walked out onto the roof with these strange machines that looked like lights but were also extremely futuristic. Itachi could tell they weren't lights after closer inspection. But what were they then? He shook that thought off and returned his attention to the reed-headed dhampir. "What exactly are these?" Rayne sighed and shook her head before responding. The sun cannons are those. That is what keeps the vampires away from the mansion. I've programmed the computer to automatically lock on to any hostile target and fire a concentrated beam of sunlight at it. Even if the target is not a vampire, it will cause severe sunburns and, in some cases, melting of the skin to humans and demons. Itachi nodded in agreement after a few seconds to let it sink in. He was aware of the vampire legends and knew how to kill one, but he was still struggling to accept that they were real. Itachi followed Rayne through the second-story hallway until they came to a halt in a room after a few more minutes of examination. If you want to stay, this is your room for the time being. If not, feel free to leave during the day when walking outside is not too dangerous. Rayne spoke as her shoulders popped. Itachi blinked a few times before turning to face Rayne as she walked away. Why did you appear and assist Naruto? I don't understand. All I know is that your statement before we left connected you to him in some way. She sighed and shook her head after a few blinks. I'll tell you when he wakes up tomorrow. Meanwhile, get some rest. He narrowed his eyes at this response, but seeing her retreat back down the stairs, he sighed and walked into his room, exhausted from using Amaterasu and killing Shisui to prevent him from assassinating Naruto. Flashback. Fugoku-sama, you are correct. I will see to it that it is completed. Tonight, I will assassinate the demon child. Fugoku smirked at Shisui as he responded. Very good, get ready. Your mission begins at 6 o'clock tonight. Fugoku replied with a big grin on his face. Shisui nodded and exited the mansion quickly. Sasuke entered the room a few minutes later, worriedly looking at his father. Fugoku kept his eyes from rolling as he observed his son's meek demeanor, but attributed it to his traitorous son's refusal to teach him. Sasuke, yes. Sasuke was startled by his father's tone. He regained his courage after a brief moment and spoke up. To-san. When will Aniki return? And when can I go play with Naru? Fugoku growled loudly when he heard the blood trader's name, but when the demon's name was mentioned, he just lost it. No. You will never again play with that abomination. Understand what I'm saying, Sasuke. Your brother, on the other hand, is a blood trader who has abandoned this clan. You must not associate with him. Sasuke flinched in fear before fleeing the room, tears streaming down his cheeks, and passing a perplexed and slightly agitated Makoto, seeing another of her sons in distress. She couldn't care less about the reason, but she was going to give Fugoku a piece of her mind and broom. Up his ass. Itachi sighed as he walked through the Uchiha district, ignoring the stares from some of the residents. He was aware of the reason. It was due to his father informing the clan that he was a traitor. His father simply did not tell them why. Unlike him, the majority of the clan respected Naruto because without him, their clan would have been wiped out because it was the target of Kyuubi's attack. He was about to turn off towards his new apartment, shaking his head, when he noticed a small raven-haired boy running out of the district. Taking a closer look, he realized it was Sasuke and rushed towards his younger brother, pushing Chakra to his feet. He was in front of his dejected brother in seconds. When Sasuke looked up and saw Itachi, he quickly hugged him and began muttering things that were too fast and muffled to understand. He rushed him to his apartment and sat him down to figure out what was up. Otouto. What occurred? Why were you fleeing in broad daylight? Sasuke rose from his couch and looked up at his brother, speaking too quickly for Itachi to understand. He spoke up, sighing as he put his head in his head. Sasuke, take a deep breath. I don't understand you in this way. After about 10 minutes, he had calmed Sasuke down enough that he could talk normally, which was a feat in and of itself because he always sounded depressed or emotionless. Okay, now tell me, what occurred? Sasuke nodded slightly and took a deep breath. When I asked Ka-san when you were going to return, she looked sad and said to ask To-san. So, after receiving a cookie from her, I went to the dining room in search of To-san. I heard To-san talking to Shisui-san about Naruto and this really big word I couldn't understand when I was outside the door. Then, after Shisui-san had left, I entered the room and asked where you were and if I could play with Naruto like all the times you had allowed me to, and he blew up and told me never to speak to you two again. Itachi gritted his teeth in anger and annoyance after taking in everything Sasuke said. There was no reason for him to vent his rage on him and Naruto and lash his Otuto with it. But something piqued his interest. What was the big word you couldn't understand, Otouto? Please try to sound it out for me. The 5-year-old Uchiha nodded and sipped the hot tea Itachi had prepared. As sig nate ion. It's something along those lines. However, I couldn't hear very well. Itachi nodded as he sipped his tea before his eyes widened as the cup in his hand shattered as he combined Naruto and the sounded-out word. He quickly stood up, grabbed his wakizashi and Anbu gear, and dressed quickly because he was about to go on duty anyway. He picked up his mask and turned to face Sasuke after finishing his dressing. You are welcome to spend the night here, Otouto. If I haven't returned by dinner time, go to the middle cabinet and look beneath my Pocky stash. There should be some money there for you to go get some food. And don't eat my pumpkin-flavored seasoning stick. Otherwise, I'll personally show you why I'm about to appoint Anbu captain. Sasuke nodded quickly, remembering how upset his older brother was when he raided his Pocky stash after Makoto refused to give him a cookie. He couldn't sit for a week, but Itachi spent the entire week in the hospital for splinters in a very uncomfortable place. Itachi nodded as he walked out the front door, only to be approached by 2 military police officers. As they came to a halt in front of him, he narrowed his eyes. What are you two looking for? Both could hear the blood trader's irritation in his voice, but they were summoned here after Fugoku learned that Itachi had taken Sasuke to his apartment. Itachi Uchiha. We were sent here by Fugoku-sama to retrieve your younger brother. So, if you don't unlock the door, we'll have to break in. The 13-year-old Uchiha prodigy scowled at the two in front of him. As you can see from my window over there, he's here of his own volition. Now go tell my father to stop acting like a royal jerk if he wants to save his own family. Sasuke shrank back from the window as Itachi pointed at him, knowing why the police officers were there for him, but surprised by his Aniki's tone. He'd never heard him say anything like this before. He sounded as if he was in a hurry to get somewhere and was irritated that he was being delayed. And the fact that he sensed malevolent energy emanating from his brother as he said the last sentence emphasized his point. Both officers were taken aback by his voice and were stunned, but they hadn't forgotten their 2 missions. To find Sasuke and hold Itachi up for 10 to 20 minutes. And they could tell Sasuke wanted to stay with his brother, so it was going to be even more difficult. So the person on the left spoke up to continue the second plan for the time being. That's fine, Itachi-san, but we can't leave without Sasuke-san. Itachi grumbled angrily as he activated his Sharingan, much to the surprise of the 2 cops, who activated their own in defense and spoke up in a powerful, yet irritated tone. I won't say it again. Leave now and tell my father to step back. If you don't, you'll force me to do something I'll regret, but not nearly as much as you two. As Itachi finished his statement, his hand reached for his wakizashi, and the two backed up a little as they prepared for battle. They were both aware that they were not on his level and would be easily defeated. In fact, they doubted that anyone in the clan, with the exception of Fugoku-sama, could stand their ground against him. They believed they could win because it was 2-1 and he would hold back because he didn't want to expose his younger brother to the harshness of the shinobi world. Then you leave us with no choice but to arrest you for civil disobedience, Uchiha Itachi. He felt a foot connect to his stomach as the butt of a wakizashi smashed into his nose, breaking it and sending him flying to the ground from 2 stories above. He thrust the sword behind him with pinpoint accuracy, ramming it through the other Uchiha's stomach and pinning him to the wall. Itachi violently yanked the wakizashi from his stomach before backhanding him to the ground and knocking him out cold. He quickly sheathed his blade and turned around to face the stunned Sasuke, who was watching the brief fight from his window. "This is why I don't train you. This is how it is in the world I live in. A world in which your own family would stab you in the back if it was in their best interests. Keep this in mind, O Tuto. You can't put your trust in anyone, not even your own family. You must go out and create your own family with the people you most trust." Sasuke nodded in fear as he watched his brother's Sharingan spin wildly before his eyes rolled into the back of his head and he collapsed to the floor, unconscious. Itachi sighed slightly before turning his gaze to the Uchiha district and bounded off to his best friend's backyard to pay him a visit and talk him out of doing this. In some way or another. Shisui was washing his face in the creek behind his house, thinking about the mission Fugoku had assigned to him. He disliked Naruto for different reasons than everyone else in Konoha. His explanation was much simpler. He was stealing Itachi from him. The little brat spent more time with the man who had his heart, despite the fact that he couldn't say anything for fear of upsetting him. Over time, he became convinced that he could sway his heart away from the young boy because it would be considered pedophilia. But every attempt seemed futile as Itachi's rage grew stronger by the day. So he did, thinking it was because he was attempting to separate him from Naruto. Unbeknownst to him, Itachi and Fugoku were at odds because Itachi wanted to adopt Naruto and Fugoku wanted Naruto dead. He noticed Itachi with his mask on his belt after hearing a swirl of leaves behind him. Shisui was taken aback by this, and even more so by the coldness in Itachi's spinning Sharingan. "We need to talk about what my Otuto heard about Naruto and assassination, Shisui." Shisui's eyes widened as he heard this and mentally cursed Fugoku for being overconfident and not using a privacy jutsu. Shaking his head, he looked at Itachi's burning Sharingan and activated his own as a precaution. "What do you think? He despises the demon brat as much as I do." Itachi's eyes narrowed as he gripped his wakizashi behind his back. "Shisui, I thought you were different from him. But if that's the case, I'm not going to let you hurt him. Not because of my father's open hatred for my sensei's son for reasons he cannot control." Shisui realized as Itachi drew out his blood-splattered wakizashi. He wasn't upset with him. He was furious with his father for attempting to murder the son of the woman he considered his second mother. That made sense to him. But it was too late when he felt the blade pierce his heart. As he looked at his best friend and secret crush, his eyes widened as he coughed up blood. He knew how much his sensei meant to him, and not even he could stand in his way. And seeing the expression on his face, he had to close his eyes because he didn't want to see it directed at him. The man he loved was filled with hatred. Itachi dipped his sword into the water to wash it off after withdrawing his blade from Shisui's heart. As he did so, he looked over at Shisui's body and felt guilty that it had come to this. His best friend had attempted to murder his godson. Even if he hated him for it, he couldn't hate Shisui because he saw it in his eyes. The look of understanding. He hadn't realized something could have changed his feelings for Naruto. That's why it hurt so much. He had just killed a teen who was close to a man who was innocent of any crime, despite the fact that he was on a mission to do so, but something he said had convinced him otherwise. And he'd already killed him before he realized it. He'd killed his best friend, no, his only friend aside from Naruto and his Otuto. He dropped his wakizashi into the creek as he grabbed his eyes and yelled in pain. His eyes were burning like hell, worse than any burn he'd ever felt. It was so painful that he considered removing them to alleviate the discomfort. He growled as it intensified, forcing him to dunk his head into the water in the hopes of putting out the fire. But it didn't work. It burned hotter and longer than before. He screamed in agony as his eyes burned even more furiously than before, and he began scratching them furiously as he pulled his face out of the water and rolled on the ground a few times, as if trying to put out a fictitious fire. After a few more rolls, the pain began to fade until it was gone. Itachi panted heavily as he dragged himself to the water's edge to see what had happened to his eyes. As he did so, he noticed that everything seemed to move much more slowly than before, and that he could see every little detail that he couldn't before. This perplexed him, but he shook it off as he approached the water's edge. He splashed water on his face a few times before looking down into the water and watching the ripples slowly crash into the shore or spread out further into the creek before dying out. As he did so, he noticed his face forming in the water. He could finally see his reflection after a few seconds, which seemed like minutes to him. His eyes widen with terror as he recalls reading the book in the secret meeting place his father forced him to attend. His eyes were unmistakably a kaleidoscope, despite looking more like a three-pointed shuriken. He said one word that would change his life forever, but he had no idea how. Mangekyu. End of flashback. Itachi sighed deeply and rubbed his eyes before settling into his bed. He didn't want to consider it. He was aware of Shisui's feelings for him, but he never expressed them because he isn't like that and didn't want to jeopardize their friendship. He shook his head as he closed his eyes and fell asleep, allowing the darkness to consume him. Rayne shook her head as she walked down the stairs, only to see Kyuubi reading an old history book. Kyuubi, of course, noticed her expression and decided to say something. "So, why did you bring the Uchiha with us?" She narrowed her eyes and replied solemnly. "I'm not sure, he reminds me of someone. Someone I used to care about." Kyuubi sighed and set the book down as he looked over at her. "You're referring to Madara. Rayne, you have to get over it. You did the right thing by killing him." Rayne nodded, unable to recall what had occurred. Every night, it haunted her dreams. She couldn't bear the thought of having to kill him for the sake of everyone. Shaking that thought away, she turned to Kyuubi and asked, "What did you do to him?" Kyuubi sighed slightly as she changed the subject, knowing that keeping her on it was a bad idea. He responded with a slight shake of his head. "I knew Naruto couldn't live with the wound he'd received. So, in order for him to survive, I transformed him from a human to a demon. As far as I know, he is the first demon, vampire half-breed to exist." Rayne nodded in understanding, sighing slightly as she noticed the title of the book. "And that's why you were reading it?" Kyuubi nodded, as if he agreed. "That's only half of the story. Something happened during the transition. Something I didn't see coming." Rayne's eyes widen as she hears this, then narrow as she waits for Kyuubi to continue. "Something happened during the transition, but I'm not sure what. But I know he's not a kitsune. He's something else. That's why I was looking things up in the book. I've never heard of a transformation in which the transformed was not the same type as the Yuki donor." Rayne nodded slightly in agreement, having never heard of it before. Kyuubi spoke again, shaking his head. "I'm going to the library to find out more about this." She nodded at him as he burst into flames and vanished, leaving Rayne alone. She sighed slightly as she walked up the stairs and to her room to rest, noticing the sun rising in the distant window and shaking her head. Naruto's eyes fluttered open as he sat up and rubbed his eyes vigorously to remove the blurriness. He then looked around the room, noticing the sun setting and his stomach growling loudly. He got up and decided to go look for something to eat, not caring that it wasn't a house he'd never been in before. Shaking that thought away, he looked around for some new clothes to wear because the ones he was wearing were tattered beyond repair. The door opened to reveal a man with reddish-orange hair holding a package as he was looking for some clothes. Naruto jumped back because he had no memories of this person and his nature told him that new people always hurt him. Kyuubi sighed and closed his eyes before hurling the package at a surprised Naruto, who somehow managed to catch it. He spoke up, shaking his head a little more. New clothing set. Come down the stairs once you've put them on. Itachi, your friend, is also down there. Naruto's eyes widened as he noticed Itachi in the room and was about to ask what was going on when the man walked out. He shrugged, not caring if Itachi-sensei was down there, and quickly opened the package, discovering it was indeed clothing. He took them out and noticed that the shirt was pitch black with dark red sleeves and was made of leather, as were the baggy leather pants, which were pitch black in the legs but red around the pelvis area, similar to Rayne's but much baggier. Naruto quickly put on the clothes and walked out of the room, finding the stairs and heading down them to see Itachi reading a book. What are you doing to her, Itachi-sensei? Itachi lifted his head from his book and smiled lightly at the only other person besides Sasuke whom he considers family. He sighed, shaking his head, because he had to tell Naruto the truth, no matter how much he disliked it.
I assisted in the killing of 2 Anbu who were attempting to kill you, so I'm pretty sure I've been labeled as a Nukenin by now.
Not exactly true, but they did nothing to assist him. They would have abandoned him to die. As he heard this, Naruto looked down at the floor, a sad expression on his face. Itachi-sensei. Why did they despise me? Why did I do anything to them? Naruto yelled at the end, tears streaming down his cheeks. Itachi sighed, knowing he'd get this reaction sooner or later. He knew that someone, even a child, would eventually question the reasons for the villagers and shinobi's ignorance. And he planned to tell him. The law of the Sandames be damned. But he was outmatched by a certain fox demon as he entered the room. That would be my fault. I was sealed inside of you until last night. Naruto's expression gradually changed from confusion to rage. He didn't know why or how he was sealed within him, but he was the obvious cause of everyone despising him. You are the reason I was despised. I don't even know who you are, but you are the source of all my misery. Why? As his blood began to boil, Naruto growled. As he stared at the man, his now emerald eyes surrounded by crimson began to bleed crimson. Kyuubi turned to face Naruto, having predicted his reaction. I was, indeed. Kyuubi no Kitsune is the name I go by. The 9-tailed fox demon, the most powerful of all living things. Naruto came to a halt as he heard this, looking terrified of the man in front of him, and slowly began to back away from him. But as soon as he said that, a woman's voice came from behind him, and Naruto recognized it as the woman who had helped save him. Is that correct? When a sharp blade was pressed against Kyuubi's neck, a metal clang was heard as he began to sweat as he looked behind him. Alright, second best. She is the most potent. As a woman with true red hair and 2 different colored eyes, right green and left red, walked out from behind him, the blade sprang back to its resting place. Perverted thoughts that should not have been in such a young mind, but were due to a certain orange book and old man, began to pop up as soon as he saw her, making Naruto blush madly seeing as how she appeared to be a living goddess. Rayne couldn't help but smirk as she saw this, but she had to stomp on it quickly. Well, Naru-kun, I doubt you'd see a relative in that kind of light. All thought processing in Naruto's head came to a halt before abruptly restarting as his eyes widened in realization. Kyuubi looked at them and coughed to get their attention as he began to panic. When they ignored him the first time, he coughed even louder. As all 3 continued to ignore him, a tick mark appeared on his forehead, and he didn't like being ignored. Hey, pay attention. I have something to say. Rayne blinked a few times before looking up at him, who was now lying on the crimson love seat. Did you say anything? As Kyuubi began grumbling about no good dhampirs and how he should kill them all, a bead of sweat fell from both Naruto and Itachi's brow. He turned back to Naruto after shaking his head and glaring at Rayne for a brief moment. Now, as I was saying before we were interrupted, the village despises you, Naruto, because you were my container. On the night of your birth, the Yondaime Hokage sealed me into you. According to what I gathered from your early childhood memories, he requested that you be regarded as a hero, but the villagers and the majority of the shinobi did not. Simply put, they saw you as me. Naruto looked up at Kyuubi, angry but perplexed, as he couldn't understand why they despised him. Shaking that off, he asked another question that struck him. How did you get out if I was your container? Kyuubi smirked because he had another opportunity to boost his ego. You believe that any mere human can contain my power. Rayne shook her head before glaring at him. Well, you wouldn't have broken out because he was never a mere human. Or did you forget about my sister being dhampir? So, in essence, Naruto had vampiric blood coursing through him. As Naruto looked at them both in confusion, Kyuubi grumbled something about hating dhampirs and how they never let him have his way. Had? Did you happen to know who my parents were? Rayne sighed before nodding and looking over at him with a sad smile on her face. Yes, I knew one of them, your father, but first let me tell you about your ancestors. Naruto nodded and sat down on the ground to listen to her story. Rayne shook her head and took a deep breath before beginning. You were the offspring of a dhampir who was my sister. Kana was her name. If I recall correctly, she married a human named Namikaze Sakumo. They had 2 children, one of whom was a dhampir and the other a human. Her dhampir child died before the age of 5 as a result of a raid on her family in order to get to me. Namikaze Ryu, her human child, survived and married a blonde-haired, blue-eyed girl. I don't remember her name, but she and Namikaze Rikamaru had a child. He was your great-grandfather, and strangely enough, you resemble him. Anyway, he met and married a girl with silvery white hair. They had a child, whose name, if I recall correctly, was Jiraiya. I stopped looking after him when he became a pervert and began spying on women in onsens and other exposed areas. Rayne's eyes glowed with fury as she remembered him peering in on her while she was taking a relaxing bath.
He learned not to do that again after she shoved a portion of her blade up his ass, resulting in the first 1,000 years of death attack ever used.
Rayne shook her head and took a deep breath to calm herself down before speaking again. I knew he was in a relationship with his teammate Tsunade and had a child with her. Namikaze Minato was the child's name. They placed him in an orphanage to keep him safe from their enemies due to their status as some of the world's most powerful shinobi. After that, I kept an eye on him to make sure nothing bad happened. I stopped hovering over him once he could defend himself and left him to his own devices. While I was away, I heard he became the Hokage of the village and had a wife, though the latter I had to learn by checking up on him. But then something happened that I had not anticipated. The village is under attack by Kyuubi. It took all of his strength to keep Kyuubi inside you and prevent him from destroying the village. Naruto's face fell to the floor as he realized his own father had burdened him with Kyuubi and that he had happened to the same Hokage he admired. Rayne was aware of this, but as she approached the fox demon, she became aware of something more important. You never told me, Kyuubi. How come you attacked the village? Kyuubi glared angrily at her, his eyes gleaming with rage as he growled. I'd prefer not to discuss it. Rayne narrowed her eyes as she heard this and looked him dead in the eyes. She knew something had happened and was certain of it. You will tell me if you want to live or not. Kyuubi glared at her, knowing she would carry out her threat, and replied. A man with auburn hair and face piercings used my fiancé copyright as leverage, threatening to kill her if I did not comply. I tried to attack him, but he was an astral projection of himself. With my hand forced, I did as he said. I felt her life force fade while I was still sealed within him, indicating she had died. As soon as he finished this, his face fell as he fought back tears before turning around and walking out of the living room. Rayne sighed and nodded in agreement, knowing what Kyuubi was going through. Itachi sighed as he turned to Naruto after a few minutes of silence and digesting all the information flying across the room. I know who your mother is, Naruto. Rayne and Naruto both turned to face Itachi, who was looking solemn before he sighed deeply. Your mother, Naruto, was Ryu Akira, the former head of Anbu. I recognized her because she taught me not to rely on my Sharingan, pointing out flaws and even proving them to me. She was my Junin sensei for the brief time I was a genin, and my mentor between the time I was a chunin and Kyuubi's attack. Both she and Yondaime-sama named me your godfather because I was one of the few people they both trusted, despite the fact that I was only 8 years old at the time. I was present when you were born and took you to the Yondaime when he requested it. When I returned to the room, all I saw was blood and nurses telling me she had died from blood loss. Itachi's voice was becoming weaker by the second as he struggled to say this. I'm sorry for not telling you sooner, but the Sandaime told me not to in order to protect you. I would have taken you to the Uchiha Manor, but San wouldn't let me. Because I wanted to keep you safe, I was exiled from the clan. I would have adopted you, but Sandaime said I was too young and refused when I became an Anbu.
Please accept my apologies. Naruto smiled after absorbing all of the information that had been dumped on him in such a short amount of time, which happened to be around 20 minutes.
His family did not abandon him, and he now understood why Itachi spent so much time taking Naruto out to eat and teaching him the fundamentals of chakra. There is no need to apologize, Itachi-sensei. You did everything you could. Hearing this, Uchiha lifted an imaginary boulder from his back, making Naruto smile and ruffle his hair. Okay, Otuto. Rayne shook her head at the scene and pretended to cough to get their attention. She spoke only after she was certain she had it. Now, Naruto, as you may know, Itachi and I saved you, but you have no idea how correct. Naruto nodded, unsure where this was going. Rayne sighed before bursting out laughing. To be honest, there was no way a human could live with such a wound. I gave you some of my blood to turn you into a dhampir, a half vampire, half human, in order to save your life. Your wound began to heal, but not quickly enough to save you. That's where Kyuubi came in and how he managed to escape. The cage holding him deteriorated as your blood changed to that of a dhampir, allowing him to escape. He decided to save you because he knew you were a relative of mine. So he flared his Yuki into your body, transforming your human side into a demon's. So you are officially the first half vampire, half demon. Naruto's eyes widen in realization as he allows all of this to sink into his now double-sized brain before speaking depressingly. So now I know what the villagers call me. Itachi and Rayne both noticed this and rushed over to him, Rayne being the first to reach him. She knelt on her knees before encircling him in a tight hug. You were never. Even if you were born with demonic blood, you don't have to become what they wanted you to be. It's always been and always will be up to you. She kissed his forehead to emphasize her point before slowly releasing him. Naruto took a few moments to recover from the hug before looking up at her. Thank you. I'm not sure what to call you. Rayne bit her lower lip, trying not to laugh. My name is Rayne, but you may address me as Ka-san if you prefer. Okay. As Naruto glommed her, the biggest smile appeared on his face. Rayne couldn't keep it together any longer and burst out laughing for the first time in over a half-century. Itachi shook his head at Naruto's reaction, smiling as he stood up and stretched. Naruto let go of her after a few moments. Rayne spoke up to both of them after she stood up. "Well, I believe it is time to begin your training." A young 10-year-old boy with sunshine blonde hair and red streaks stood on top of Kaminari no Kuni's tallest mountain, overlooking Kumogakure. It was in the dead of night to keep his presence hidden from everyone. He was dressed in pitch-black leather pants and shirt with blood-red sleeves, a reddish-orange fox head on the front, and 9 tails swirling around the Uzumaki spiral on the back. Naruto sighed as he gazed over the Kumogakure village. He wasn't usually assigned to missions like this. Sure, he could do them, but it wasn't typical of him. Add to that Itachi was currently gathering information on a criminal organization with 10 S-class Nukenin for an unknown purpose other than collecting bijus. Shaking his head, he recalled Itachi telling him about his meeting with the same man who was responsible for Kyuubi's attack on Konoha. Flashback. Itachi fixed his gaze on the man in front of him. He recognized him right away because of what little Kyuubi said about why he attacked. This was the man who had murdered his fiancée. He narrowed his eyes at him, knowing that even with his enhanced Hanyu abilities, he would lose a fight. "What exactly do you want?" Before speaking, the auburn-haired man just looked at him, assessing him. "I'd like to offer you a position in our organization, Uchiha Itachi," Akatsuki says. At this, he narrowed his eyes even more. He'd heard from Rayne after their brief meeting with Jiraiya of the Red Dawn, a group he'd been looking into. "What would entice me to join?" The man smirked at him before responding perfectly. "Our group wishes for world peace, but in order to do so, we need the power of the most powerful beings in the world. We can use them to prevent wars and give the world what it truly deserves. Freedom.
But before you can join, you must return to Konoha and exterminate your own clan."
If Rayne hadn't told Itachi about this group earlier, he might have found this offer appealing. And he knew if he had been alone, he would have taken it. But when he realized he wanted him to murder his own clan, he responded angrily. "Then I refuse because I will not do anything that will harm my family, no matter how much I dislike them." It was now the man's turn to close his eyes. This should never happen. He should have accepted his proposal easily, given what he discovered about him through the bingo book and his own spy network. So, what made him refuse? Itachi spoke up again while he was thinking about this. "Now I have a message for you. If you go after the Biju, keep an eye on your back. Because I know your group's true purpose, I will help defend them." When the said Uchiha burst into a flock of ravens, the man narrowed his eyes and was about to eliminate him to keep Itachi from becoming a threat. He narrowed his eyes and quickly left the area to inform the others. End of flashback. Naruto shook his head and returned his gaze to the village. He was sent here to apprehend and kill 2 members of the same group, extract Nibi no Nekomata's Jinchuriki, and return her to her home. If his other orders hadn't been to kill the 2 Akatsuki members, he would have just extracted her. He was also instructed to keep an eye out for a 3rd member who might be lurking in the distance and to kill him if possible. Naruto was still perplexed as to why Rayne, Kyuubi, and Itachi had all chosen him for this mission. He was certain that Itachi could easily defeat them even without his Mangekyu. Because his strength and speed had nearly tripled after being transformed into a Hanyu. During one of their fights, Rayne discovered that Itachi was going blind every time he used his Mangekyu, owing to him walking into the wall without activating his Sharingan. When she discovered this, she approached Kyuubi about a solution because he was the creator of the bloodline. So, after consulting with Itachi, they devised a ritual to transform Itachi into a Hanyu, which was successful thanks to Jiraiya's assistance. That was another thing that happened over the course of 5 years. They came across the world's greatest pervert while Rayne was out training Naruto. He agreed to train Naruto briefly after a brief discussion with Rayne and Jiraiya, primarily because it was Minato's wish. During his training with Jiraiya, he discovered that the old man had been assassinated shortly after he had left, and the Uchiha clan had been massacred. Itachi had not taken this well and had locked himself away in his room until he was informed that Sasuke was still alive. Shaking that thought away, Naruto's eyes widened as he noticed a large amount of Yuki being used near two large chakra signatures. He mentally cursed himself before rushing towards it, chastising himself for not sensing it sooner. He dashed into the village after spotting a large Yuki figure in the distance that resembled a cat and dashed in that direction. Naruto arrived to find the Yuki Nekomata had dissipated and two men in black cloaks with red clouds on them standing there. His eyes widened as he noticed a blonde-haired girl who appeared to be a few years older than him pinned to the wall, with the two men about to crucify her. Naruto's blood boils as memories of his life in Konoha flash through his mind. He growled as he let his rage consume him, but instead of attacking them, he concentrated his rage and transformed into a flash of black and red light. Both Akatsuki members were thrown into the wall in an instant as Naruto appeared in front of them. Looking around, Naruto noticed a seal on the ground and rubbed it away with his foot, assuming it belonged to them. He pulled the 13-year-old Jinchuriki off the wall before flashing her out of harm's way before returning in front of them as the two pulled themselves out of the wall. When the two regained their surroundings and looked for their attacker, they were both taken aback when they saw the kid they mistook for the Kyuubi Jinchuriki. The man on the right, who was wearing a mask that covered most of his face except his eyes, spoke up. "Look at our luck today, Hidan. We'll have all but 3 Bijus left if we catch him today." Hidan, the man, smirked as he heard this. "It appears to be Kakuzu. Today, Jashin has blessed us." Naruto mentally smirked at these two. They were fortunate that the girl was unable to use Nibi's true power, only her Yuki. Oh my god, these two are a joke. They must be the weakest link in this organization, or else this is pathetic. He developed a slight smirk before laughing at the two in front of him. Of course, this elicited the desired reaction from them. They became enraged, and Hidan drew his scythe. Naruto stopped laughing again before looking them in the eyes and speaking confidently while grinning. "You know, you two are extremely fortunate today. You're lucky you only have to fight me. Rayne and Itachi are both away doing more important things." As Kakuzu seethed, a tick mark appeared on Hidan's head. A child was dispatched to stop them. It was offensive. It was embarrassing. Above all, it irritated them to no end. Hidan threw his scythe at Naruto with frightening speed, unable to take it any longer. Naruto's grin never left his face as his eyes flashed slightly as he used dilated perception to easily sidestep the scythe. Dilated perception was similar to the Sharingan's analyzing ability in that it slowed everything down, giving him an advantage in being able to quickly counter his opponents. It was also the first thing Rayne taught him to control, aside from his blood rage. He reached out and grabbed the scythe, then pulled back and snapped the chain that was attached to it. As he threw the scythe, Naruto smirked even more. "Well, that was sad. I think I'll just end this." When Kakuzu smirked at him, both Akatsuki members growled loudly. "Go ahead and give it a shot, boy." As soon as he said that, he used super speed to transform into a black and red flash. Rayne had taught him yet another skill. He initially thought it would be ineffective because he could already increase his speed by flowing his Yuki to his legs. But he quickly discovered that this was not the case. It was even more useful than he could have imagined. When he used it, the world around him appeared as it did in dilated perception, but he could still move at his normal speed within it. He had discovered that the Yondaime had accidentally discovered how to use this ability, which is how he became known as the Kuroi Senko. Naruto appeared behind Kakuzu in an instant. As I previously stated, I'm going to end this. His wrist blade sprang into action as he rammed it through 2 masks in his back, destroying 3 of Kakuzu's hearts. Hidan's eyes widened as he saw this before rushing through some hand seal, only to have his hands slashed off in a flash of black and red light. Naruto stood in front of him, looking passively at him before kicking him into the alley. Hidan's arms slid off in 3 flashes as Naruto kicked his stomach, sending his upper body into the wall while Hidan's blood splattered all over the alleyway. Naruto appeared in front of him and slammed one of his blades into his heart while his feet gripped and ripped Hidan's head off, spraying even more blood around the area and onto Naruto. Kakuzu was terrified beyond belief as he watched his partner be sliced to pieces in less than 10 seconds. Fearing for his life, he attempted to flee, but in an instant, Naruto appeared behind him and thrust his blades into the other 2 masks, ending Kakuzu's life. When Naruto realized he was dead, he pulled his blades from his corpse and watched Kakuzu fall to the ground, lifeless. When he was about to walk over to where he had placed the Nibi Jinchuriki, he heard a voice. A voice I recognize. The voice of the man he had slashed to pieces. So he turned around to make sure he wasn't hallucinating. Hidan's head cursing him out. Goddamn little jerk. Come over here so I can bite you. Naruto did the only thing he could because he was caught off guard. He began to go completely insane. He could fight, turned and rip people to bloody shreds, but a talking head that he had severed from its body was simply too much for him. Regaining his composure, he decided to end it as his blades sprang back into place before slamming them between Hidan's eyes. Good. Maybe that will put a stop to him. As his blades retracted, Naruto walked over to the girl and checked her injuries and pulse. He flinched as he realized how bad they were and realized he needed to get her home as soon as possible and have Kyuubi convince Nibi to turn her container into a Hanyu. Shaking it off, he went down to pick her up when Hidan's head began to speak again. Goddammit. That killed you, little shit. Naruto turned around and glared at the head, developing a tick mark as both his eyebrows twitched in irritation. Why are you not dying? Hidan simply spat blood on Naruto's boots in response. You fuck, I'm immortal. I'm not going to die. Hearing that, Naruto's eyes twitched and he glared at the head before a small smirk graced his lips. Well, then, we'll just have to do something about it. Hidan paled as Naruto's blades resurged as he grabbed his head and tossed it into the air. Naruto smirked before slicing his head into hundreds of tiny pieces once more. He turned it off and panted as he watched the pieces fall to the ground. If that doesn't kill you, it sure as hell shuts you up. Naruto quickly turned around and returned to pick up the Nibi Jinchuriki before fleeing towards the mansion, knowing he had to get there for her sake. Unbeknownst to him, a plant-like man emerged from the ground after he had left and examined his 2 fallen comrades. Naruto arrived on the island quickly and was relieved that he only used his Banpai Ryoku and not his Yuki because he had to dispatch a few low-level vampires and a turned along the way. This was after he had run across a 10-mile stretch of water. When he arrived at the mansion, he didn't care if the sun cannons were firing at him. He kicked the door open to find Rayne and Itachi playing Go. Both of them jumped up when they heard the door crash and turned to see Naruto. When they noticed the girl on his shoulder and her condition, they both glared at him angrily for getting them worked up for nothing. Rayne was beside him in an instant, checking on her injuries. Can you tell me what happened? Naruto sighed and explained that while waiting for them to attack, he became distracted and discovered them about to take her with them, him easily killing them, and Hidan's talking head distracting him even more. Rayne nodded as she heard this, while Itachi looked concerned about Hidan's talking head. Ignoring him, Rayne grabbed Naruto and they were suddenly in Kyuubi's quarters. The fox demon in question looked at them with annoyance and was relieved that he had only just gotten dressed. He noticed Nibi's presence within the girl and the girl's condition as he looked at them. Kyuubi appeared beside them, cursing mentally, and took her from Naruto before laying her on the bed. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and placed them on her stomach before entering the seal. Kyuubi noticed he was in a large circular room with a giant, chained-down black cat with two tails in the center as soon as he entered. And she was staring at him murderously with her golden yellow eyes. The cat attempted to lunge at him but was restrained by the chains. Kyuubi sighed and shook his head as he recognized her problem. "Nibi, pay attention to me," the said Nekomata yelled at him while lunging at him. "I would never listen to anyone else but myself." She'd either never seen Kyuubi in human form before or had forgotten what he looked like. Kyuubi's head developed a tick mark as he snarled at her before transforming into his true form in all its glory. Kyuubi's gaze met hers for a split second before slamming 4 of his tails onto her back. "Listen to me, you worthless shit. You will follow my instructions, or I will murder you." Nibi had become docile to the killing intent Kyuubi was unleashing on her in an instant, and she nodded her head to avoid feeling Kyuubi's wrath. Kyuubi continued on, noticing her docile form and knowing she was now listening. "You will use your magic to transform the girl into Hanyu. You will then be free to do whatever you want. However, given the dangers we face right now, it would be best to remain here. Do it right now, and I'll go over everything later." Nibi nodded as Kyuubi vanished from her seal, glaring at the fox demon. Nibi flared her Yuki in the girl's system and began to mold her container's DNA into that of a Hanyu's. Kyuubi's eyes opened and he stepped away from the girl, surrounded by a blackish-yellow aura. It took the form of a cat with one tail and swirled viciously around her, changing her features into demonic ones. She emerged with longer and sharper claws, a large pair of hardened fangs, and, strangely, a pair of blonde cat ears where the normal ones should have been. The blackish-yellow Yuki flared as soon as it was finished, but this time it formed outside of the girl's body and took the shape of a woman's. When it came to a halt, there was a woman with pitch-black hair and yellow cat-like eyes. She was dressed in a kimono that was white in the front but black in the back. As her eyes shifted to Kyuubi form, her face took on a regal appearance. She looked him over for a few seconds before speaking. "What do you mean we're in danger, Kyuubi?" Kyuubi sighed deeply as he approached the door. "It's best if you come with me to the library and I'll explain." Nibi gave him another look before nodding and following Kyuubi out of the room. Rayne sighed slightly as she picked up the new Hanyu. She walked out of the room, Naruto close behind her, before sighing again. "Naruto, you need to learn how to pay attention better. This is the 4th mission you almost failed because of that." Naruto nodded solemnly, knowing it to be true. "And this time it almost cost someone their life." "I apologize, Ka-san." Rayne shook her head before returning his smile. "It's fine, but you'll have to work on it before your next mission." The dual half-breed smiled and nodded before yawning and making his way to his room for a good night's sleep. He was immune to sunlight because of his demonic blood, but his vampiric blood hated it with an unholy zeal. Naruto jumped out of bed a few hours later when he heard someone trying to creep their way around the mansion. He sighed, closing his eyes and focusing on his nose, as he instantly recognized the girl's scent. Shaking his head, he jumped out of bed and hurriedly dressed so he could meet her. Naruto walked out the door and nearly ran into the said girl, not expecting her to be so close to his door. Naruto shook his head and took a step back before looking over at her. "It's funny how trying not to wake people up in this house wakes them up. You should just make as much noise as you can and they won't notice you're there." Naruto's ridiculous statement drew a blink from the girl. Before he could respond, she grabbed him by the collar of his shirt and began shaking him. "What have you done to me? I appear to be a cat girl." Naruto stopped sweating because it was true. but he needed to defuse the situation, so he waved her off. I rescued you from those two, and Kyuubi persuaded Nibi to turn you into a Hanyu so you could live. As soon as he said this, the girl dropped Naruto, who turned in midair and landed on his feet, her face contorted in shock. Hanyu. You mean I'm now half demon? Naruto nodded at her, knowing she needed to know. Yes, and I am as well. I'm also a dhampir, which means that I'm half vampire.
Nobody in this house is completely human.
Nibi, your former tenant. When she heard that, the girl froze. Nibi, as far as she knew, was still sealed within her. What exactly do you mean by old? Naruto sighed deeply, wishing he didn't have to do this. He told her, shaking off the thought. When she turned you into a Hanyu, she was freed from her seal. She'll probably be staying with us for a while until Rayne, Itachi, and I can solve the Akatsuki problem. Hearing this, she paled and her blood chilled. When Naruto noticed this, he patted her on the back. You are also welcome to stay there, as your village is unlikely to want you back the way you are now, or to turn you into a living weapon. The girl's expression changed from shock to solemn as she realized it was true. She spoke depressingly, nodding her head lightly. You're correct. They were already attempting to use me as a weapon. They would probably try harder or kill me now. She paused for a few moments before turning to face Naruto. Are you certain I can stay? Naruto waved her off with a nod of his head. Yeah, Ka-san said you could before you arrived. When she heard this, the 13-year-old girl blinked in perplexity. Before I arrived? He sighed and nodded at her, wishing someone would come and take over for him. Even if he admitted the girl was cute, she was becoming annoying. It was my mission to find you and kill your assailants. We're attempting to save the remaining Biju before the Akatsuki get their hands on them. The Ichibi, Gobi, and Sanbi are the only ones left. We know where Ichibi is because his tenant is a killing machine. She nodded in understanding after digesting all of this information before her stomach decided to make its presence known by rumbling loudly. Naruto snickered before shaking his head, and she blushed deeply. Are you hungry? So, come with me to the kitchen. She nodded and followed him to the stairs before he returned his attention to her because he had forgotten something. By the way, what is your name? Namikaze Naruto is my name. Before responding, the girl smiled at him. My name is Ni Yugito.
So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more awesome stories like this. Thank you. See you all in my next video.